And I think if you talk to any given person and ask them which one they would choose, they would tell you, of course, I want to be an active participant in life. But we're still scrolling ourselves to death. We're still spectators. Like, so that just speaks to how addictive it is for us.
Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Easley in Context, and my guest today is Brett McCracken. Brett is a senior editor for the Gospel Coalition, and he's the author of The Wisdom Pyramid, Feeding Your Soul in a Post-Truth World, and Uncomfortable, the Awkward and Essential Challenge of Christian Community. He lives with his family in Southern California. He's yet to move to Tennessee like everyone else from California. Brett, thanks for coming on the program today.
Thank you, Michael. And believe me, I've been tempted on more than one occasion to move to Tennessee.
Well, somebody's got to stay in California, right? I mean, a lot of your friends are moving here.
And you guys have had enough Californians, I think.
Tell them that. No, it's all good. It's all good. Well, before we start talking about this book, Scrolling Ourselves to Death, it's a frightening book for so many reasons. But I have to tell you, I was so delighted. I could only find 2 of Postman's book, but I bought these books when they first came out. So I was thrilled to see your references to Neil Postman. I thought I was like one of the last 5 people that
yes,
knew of Neil Postman.
Technopoly is a good one. That was my first introduction to Postman when I was in college.
Well, I have his Amusing Ourselves to Death, but I couldn't find it in the myriads of boxes where my books are now relegated. So I'm going to start already at the beginning saying, I think we're going to have to do 2 of these. So I want to give an early invitation for you to come back at another time, not too distant future, to do a part 2, because this book is blowing my mind, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, that's good to hear there, but this topic is huge, right? There's so much to talk about. It's the topic of our time, I think, in terms of cultural changes, cultural challenges. So I'd be happy to do a part 2.
Take a step back and tell me about putting this together. What was the impetus? Because there's always a story about these collections.
Yeah, I mean, the impetus really was Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, turning 40. So that book came out in 1985, if you can believe it. It feels so contemporary in many ways. It feels like he could have written that book, last year, but came out 40 years ago. And so at the Gospel Coalition, a lot of us on staff as editors have been really influenced by Postman. And we were just talking amongst ourselves a couple of years ago, like anticipating 2025 is going to be the 40th anniversary of that really influential book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. So what could we do to kind of pay homage to that book and how important and helpful it was, but also draw from it and apply it to today's new world of technology, which is a different world than 1985. So that's where the idea for the book came about. We decided to do an edited volume so we could incorporate a lot of different voices, kind of some of the best thinkers in the Christian space these days about technology and media. So we reached out to all the contributors, organized kind of topics for them to address, and really happy with the end result.
Well, it's fascinating reading. It's depressing as all get out. And I'm hoping that in a conversation you can give me some
hope. With a title like
hope.
Scrolling Ourselves to Death, it's not going to be a feel-good Hallmark movie experience.
I have this phrase when I preach, like, another cheery Michael Easley sermon, so we can say another cheery Brett McCracken book. I'm going to read a couple of comments from your introduction. The death march of our scrolling society is not just a metaphor. In many ways, the smartphone is literally killing us. Great line. You continue research to make compelling correlations between smartphones, especially social media usage, and the rising mental unhealth, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, loneliness, especially among teens and young adults. Brett, I pastored for most of the past 45 years, and to walk into the back of an auditorium, a church building, and see every person with their head, I predict we're going to have cervical issues. You need a chapter on cervical dysfunction. But we're all doing this. We're not talking. We're not shaking hands. We're not working the room. We're not shy from people. We're hiding in a device.
Yeah, and that image of kind of the hunched down, looking down at your device, it's a really haunting image for me because what is behind that image is what we're not doing, right? Like you're alluding to. When we're hunched down looking at our phone, we're not looking up, right? We're not looking at God. We don't create space to just worship him, to be present with him, to pray. That part is kind of crowded out of our experience. But we're also not looking around us horizontally at the people in our midst, the community that God has placed us in the flesh, right? The embodied community. It's such a sad thing for me to see whether we're talking about like a family at the dinner table where like every member is like looking down at their device rather than communing with one another, or people in a church, or strangers just in a coffee shop or in a waiting room. Everyone is just in their own little world looking at their device. And what are we missing out on in terms of the human connection with one another, let alone like that communion with God that I think is so critical to our spiritual health?
Mm-hmm. It's a sidebar, and I suspect one of the chapters addresses this, but schools that are now smartphone free, phone free zones where you got to put it in a bucket or a box or what they call those cases before you go into your school.
Right.
And
phone
just
prison
the change
or something.
of Faraday cases, the change of attitude and relearning eye contact and talking interaction in the lunchroom as opposed to buried in your social media. This was surprising, not surprising. Smartphone, the term coined 1997. The web is only 3 decades old. I still remember when the web launched and there were landing pages but no content. And I remember talking to, we were in D.C. at the time, one of my friends in the military, and I said, these are a lot of book covers with no contents. He said, wait. Boy, was he right. I really appreciated the way you juxtaposed Postman and Orwell. I thought let me just read part of your introduction here. Again, you mentioned 1985. He called the age of show business. The old books Postman looked for insight were a pair of dystopian novels, George Orwell, published in 1949, and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, 1932. Working on his book in 1984, Postman pondered, had Orwell's vision of that year come to fruition, or was Huxley's dark vision of the future more accurate? Again, that just chilled me when I read that, Brett. Postman concluded, Huxley's dystopia, not Orwell's, better predicted the shape of Western society. And then a section you quote from Postman's book. Orwell feared that those who would deprive us of information, Orwell feared those would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those would give us so much we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. You write it today. You're exactly right. It's beyond terrifying.
Yeah, I think that was one of the parts that Postman was so predictive and so right on the money in terms of 40 years ago, he was arguing that if there's going to be a dystopia, it's going to come from not this big brother inflicting pain, but kind of this inflicting pleasure, right? This kind of opting into a world of constant mediation, pleasure, scrolling, being glued to devices, screens, etc. That is what will pacify us. That is what will make us impotent, right? To be kind of, to have an IV drip, if you will, of constant media. That is the dystopia that Aldous Huxley predicted in Brave New World, or that was the vision that he was offering. And Postman is right that that's probably more accurate to where we're at today. I do think there's maybe some Orwellian aspects to today's culture. There are some sketchy things that governments do to withhold information and hide things, and that's very Orwellian. But by and large, in the smartphone age, when we're all kind of addicted to these devices that go with us everywhere we go, they're essentially like new appendages attached to our body, and we can't stop like filling every open moment in our lives with head down, glued to our device, scrolling. That's a dystopian picture, right? When everyone you look at in a crowd, at a train station, at a coffee shop, is doing the same thing of like kind of glazed over eyes, scrolling on their device. To me, that's dystopian, and that's where we're at, right? So that's why this book is called Scrolling Ourselves to Death. That's why it has kind of a dystopian, a little bit depressing vibe to it. Although I will point out that the subheading of our book is Reclaiming Life in a Digital Age. So we do pivot to some hopefulness in the last couple chapters of the book. I don't know if you've gotten there yet,
if you
Michael,
survived to the end of the book,
yeah.
right? Let's talk a little bit about, I always think it's important people understand that the purpose of not just a paragraph, but a book. What is an author trying to accomplish? And I really did appreciate, I won't read the whole thing, but just a couple of lines. The dynamics of television age posed provocative questions for Christians in the 80s. The dynamics of the internet age have only amplified the questions and introduced many new ones for the 2020s. Our own spiritual health to maintain a prophetic power, a witness in a world being changed faster than we can recognize. Christians in the cultural moment should slow down and think wisely about the ever-changing technology swirling around us. Sadly, many Christians default toward a naive embrace of technology. And this, I'm the only person in my family that has a non-iPhone platform. I live in the PC heart, the green world, and I do it out of pride and spite and ego. But I'm struck by I want to talk to you about dopamine, but I'm struck by the insatiability of the next new thing, Brett. What number of iPhone is going to satisfy even a mature Christian? I mean, some of my, really strong brothers, they got to have the latest bleeding edge iPhone. And I'm going, what's it going to do for you? I mean, I'm proud to say my Samsung is like almost 7 or 8 years old now, and it works fine. But what's the next, what is it about that consumerism from your vantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of layers to that question. I mean, on one hand, to go really deep, it's just part of human nature, right? Since the beginning of time, in the Garden of Eden, our fallen human nature kind of craves novelty and like the new, and like, in the Screw Tape Letters, C.S. Lewis talks about this kind of the dangers of novelty for like tempting us. So I think it's part of our nature to get bored easily and kind of get fidgety and want something new. And then I think we have to think about the market forces, right? These are Apple, Samsung. These are corporations that need to make money. So it's in their best interest to figure out ways to make consumers restless and like introducing new capabilities of each new model, introducing new apps. Now, the latest iPhone has like basically AI that like can run your life if you want it to. Like, and I'm kind of personally scared of that. So like you, my iPhone is like, I have like the iPhone 10 or something. It's like pretty old. And honestly, even though my iPhone is kind of slow and there's lots of problems with it, it's got a cracked screen, I'm really hesitant to get the newest version because there's aspects to like the AI conversation with smartphones that honestly scare me. I don't know if I want a device that's like got this kind of crazy level of intelligence, but a lot of people do, right? And I think part of the temptation of technology is, in theory, it's making your life easier, right? So who wouldn't want a digital assistant that's like an AI powered assistant that can like schedule everything for you and like figure out your calendar and like make appointments and make restaurant reservations on your behalf? Like, that sounds nice. And that's the heart of technology, right? Every technology is trying to solve a problem for you, and in theory that reduces friction in your life, reduces pain points, and smooths the way for you in some way. But that's where we have to be so careful as Christians, because the smooth way, right, the broad path, as we know, is not always the best path in life. Like, I wrote the book Uncomfortable. So in that book, I'm arguing that there's something good about friction and discomfort, because it's how we grow. It's how we remain spiritually healthy. When we choose comfort and convenience at every opportunity, things tend to go awry in our spiritual health. So technology is just that ever-present temptation to choose comfort and convenience, against every other option.
I use the phrase bigger, better, newer, more, that we're never satisfied, that, the comparison is the kiss of death, contentment every time we see some new thing.
Yes.
My phone was cracked, the screen was cracked, and I went to a place to get a new screen, and the guy said, it's going to cost you $300 for a new piece of glass. Why don't you just get a new phone? And I said, out of principle.
Good
I spent
choice.
$300 to get a new screen on an old phone. So more power to you with your iPhone 10. Let's talk about dopamine, because this is a number of years ago. I went to my dentist and we got to talking about random things. He's a brilliant guy, and he has a lot of patients that chew their fingernails, which of course is bad for dental hygiene, dental health. And he said, Michael, you know why people chew their fingernails? I went, habit, annoys them. What? It goes, no, it's dopamine. He said, every time you bite your nail, you get a hit of dopamine. And he goes, it's the same thing when you do this on your phone. It's a dopamine. And that's the first time, Brett, I had heard that explanation. And you've got a whole chapter dedicated to this issue. Expand on that some for folks.
Yeah, I think it's the first chapter in the book. It's written by a guy named Patrick Miller, who's one of, I think, the sharpest minds right now on digital technology and how it's forming us. And we put that chapter first because it's kind of a fundamental dynamic of the digital age that we're in, the age of algorithms, is this idea of dopamine media. And what it is essentially these tech companies, to go back to what I was saying about these are profit-driven companies, they're incentivized to make the most money. And how do you make the most money if you're Facebook or, Apple? It's keeping people on devices scrolling as long as possible to keep their attention, to captivate them, to keep them hooked, right? So even the language of addiction is a very self-conscious desire of these companies. And a lot of these companies literally hired but behavioral psychologists to help kind of tweak the algorithms to make them as addictive as possible. So they kind of borrowed ideas from the casino industry and slot machines and all the different dings and sounds that slot machines make. All of that is very intentionally created to maximize addiction. And if you think about what smartphone apps do, right? They have dings and little vibrations and things that trigger dopamine because we got another like on our video or someone, messaged us. So we got a new text message. Someone likes me, all of these things are manufactured. They're really dialed in by these corporations to be maximally addictive in the same way that casino machines are. And I think just being real about that is helpful because we know what we're up against. When we open our phone, we have to just be honest that we're doing the equivalent of sitting down at a slot machine or sitting down at a bar, to have a glass of alcohol. These things are all built on the same kind of mechanisms of human psychology in terms of addiction and giving us these bursts of pleasure that over time we want to do more of, right? Because when you get a burst of pleasure, whether it's through the thought of making money on a casino game or, the pleasure that a drink of alcohol might give someone, you do it more and more and more and more because humans are naturally, we want pleasure more than pain, right? To go back to what I was saying about choosing comfort and convenience over, uncomfortable choices and friction. And so, I think that dopamine media idea is a very base level dynamic of the structure of the digital age that we just have to be really sober about as Christians. And it's quite disturbing when you think about what we're up against.
Mm-hmm. Your comment about pain and discomfort, one of the things I asked a lot of my guests is there any Christian growth apart from pain? Yeah. And to date, no one's ever said, sure, because when the creature comforts, I say when my marriage is fine, when my money's fine, my health is fine, my kids are fine, my grandkids are fine, my friendships are fine, I don't need God. but you touch one of those areas, or sin crouches in and hurts something. That's the fulcrum. And it is a desensitizing thing. I think in the chapter, I'm trying to find my notes, without scrolling. This is a challenge. In a world of medium where print's on a tablet.
Choose pain. Choose the painful path. Ruffling through your papers.
Well, I didn't have the book yet, so that's the problem. I had to use the tablet. I always prefer the book. But Miller talks about there's a fulcrum between not just winning, but the tension. If I remember his section right, he says it's not just that you want to keep winning and gambling or the machine, it's the in-between.
It's the unpredictability. It's the kind of seemingly random possibility of winning. There's something addictive about that. And there's very close parallel. There's a close parallel with the way social media operates, because when you post something on social media, let's say you post an opinion on X, you don't know how it's going to be received. There's an element of unpredictability there. It could go viral, right? It could be a huge hit. You could get like hundreds of likes. It could blow up, or it could be a dud and no one likes it. And that's just the unpredictability of it. It very much is like doing the whole like lever on a casino, slot machine. You don't know if you're going to get. You don't know if you're going to hit the jackpot, but the possibility that it might go viral and hit the jackpot, that's what's so alluring. That's what's so intriguing and addicting.
My first job out of college, I worked for the Deep East Texas Council of Governments in Nacogdoches, Texas. And I had a coworker, and we both had motorcycles, and we would, at lunch, we'd go get a bite to eat, and we'd stop by the mall at a food court, and they had the video arcades. And he wanted to go in and play a video game. And we were newly married. We had no money. And I remember putting 50 cents into I think it was called Joust or something, or one of these Space Invader things. And Brett, I bet I didn't do that 10 times over the course of as many weeks, and went, this is a mental form of gambling. And I'm putting 50 cents in, that sounds silly today, but that I really shouldn't be spending, into a very brief engagement of a big screen and knobs and buttons in those days. And it freaked me out, because I was thinking about playing this dumb game as I was going to lunch. And could I get to, and I think in God's kindness, one reason I never got into gaming on computers or otherwise was that part of me, naive or immature, whatever it was, I thought, I don't need to go there. I got enough trouble in life. But it's just another layer of this, right? I mean, the frenetic nature of that dopamine hit. I got to have it. Now, what happens? We're desensitized, right? And so the amount of dopamine that we might normally have with my grandchildren laughing as we're horsing around on the floor, versus a sustaining that with thumb scrolling or any kind of engagement. That's the downside. That's the danger, right?
That's one of the dangers. Yeah, there's lots of dangers here.
Right.
I mean, I think one reality is that as pleasurable as these dopamine hits might be in the moment, like the reality is, like, if you spend like 2 hours scrolling on your phone and you like realize 2 hours in, what have I been doing with my life? Like, there's something very depressing about it. Like, it might be it's momentarily pleasurable, but in the end, it's not satisfying. There's nothing deeply satisfying about the scrolling life. Like, one of the big ideas that shows up a few times in different chapters in this book is kind of the contrast between being a digital spectator of life, kind of constantly scrolling and looking at other people's lives and what influencers are doing and kind of what's happening in the news all over the world, versus being an active participant in your own kind of local embodied mission. And the former, the kind of digital spectating, is not a satisfying way to live. You're not going to be happy years down the road to look back on your life and be like, what did I accomplish? Well, I was really good at watching influencers do things online. I was really a good YouTube consumer. I was a great podcast consumer. Like, that's not a inspiring way to live, right? So we all know intuitively that given those options of being a digital spectator versus an active participant who's building things, who's making a life, who's creating a vibrant family, who's active in a local church, who's doing something tangibly to bring order out of chaos in whatever genre of chaos God has called you to, that is a satisfying life. But you have to get off your phone in order to have that life. You have to be an active participant. And that's the stakes, right? That's why this is such an important conversation, because if we as Christians have the most important kind of mission in the world, and the ordering of chaos that we're called to is literally like the spiritual destiny of people in terms of are they going to, spend their life eternally with God or not? Like, the stakes are high. And so if Christians are wasting away our time just kind of endlessly spectating, and we have the most important, urgent, compelling call of anyone, then that's just, what hope is there for anyone, So we have to model the more satisfying way to live, which is investing in something beyond your own little narcissistic, tailored to me diet of dopamine media, and living with a bigger picture, with a bigger purpose, with a tangible everyday reality where you're actually engaging with real people, in the flesh. It's just, on every level, it's so much more compelling, that life. And I think if you talk to any given person and ask them which one they would choose, they would tell you, of course, I want to be an active participant in life. But we're still scrolling ourselves to death. We're still spectators. So that just speaks to how addictive it is for us, even though we know, in our minds that what we're doing is wasting time, and it's distracting, and it's taking us away from the more satisfying ways we can spend our time. We're still doing it, because there's something about it that's so addictive that we can't resist.
A section of that chapter in Dopamine Nation, Stanford professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences, Anna, I think it's Lembrick, argues pervasive, cheap, and easy to access products and experience release dopamine in the brain are creating a mental health crisis unlike any other in human history. This is for the simple reason that most people in history live with scarcity, limited access to foods, substances, and experiences that release dopamine in the brain. But now we live in a world of abundance. Our brains were not designed to live in such a world. And to your point, I don't mean to be unkind or indelicate, but there's this trend of people that are, moving to a piece of land, and they're farming, and they're getting chickens, and they're getting a pig that they're going to raise and butcher, and they post it all on social media.
Yes.
I thought the idea was to get away from this nonsense, and you've just created another layer. I'm sorry,
and by them posting that, it's making all of us covet that and long for that, because I want to do that too. I would love to live like a Wendell Berry life on a farm in Kentucky and raise chickens. So that's a temptation for me to long for that. But yeah, you're totally right. There can be a way that we posture and pose our own kind of analog convictions. But when we do it on social media, I mean, honestly, I feel this tension right now as I'm promoting this book, Scrolling Ourselves to Death. I'm occasionally sharing on social media, doing it, and it feels like a little weird to do that, but hopefully I'm meeting the people where they're at in terms of
what we're doing right now. What we're doing right now, we're doing a podcast and a YouTube for people to watch. I'm going, this is so incongruous.
Well, that's a good conversation intention to unpack, though, because one thing I do want to say, just to nuance this a little bit, because it can come across technology is all bad and, it's just making us horrible and crazy and sick, which all of that is true. But I think there are ways that it can be used responsibly, and for better or worse, it is the technology that is driving our world, digital technology. And Christians can either choose to be off of it for their own spiritual health, and that's a valid choice. But if all Christians kind of retreated from digital life for fear of being contaminated by all of the different ways that it can contaminate you, it would be like if Christians during Ebola outbreak in Africa, if like all Christians who are in like medical missions decided, nope, the risk is too great for me personally, so we're just going to let the diseased people kind of suffer on their own. That's the mission field of digital technology. I think we have to have Christians, whether podcasts like yours or the Gospel Coalition, which is what I work for, which is a digital ministry. We primarily are in the business of creating digital resources, articles, videos, podcasts to meet people online. And it's just the recognition that these technologies, they might be on the whole, a net loss for society. They might be making things worse generally, but it is what it is. And if we're going to bring health to these spaces, if we're going to bring things online that maybe like direct people offline, that's something that, I believe you are motivated to do. And me, like, I want people listening to these podcasts or reading my articles online, even if they're encountering it on a smartphone. I'm hopeful that they will hear what I'm saying as a call to action to go off of your device more often than you currently do, to go to church, to be an active participant in your family and your community. But sometimes they have to hear that message first online, right? And so we need Christians being kind of communicators in these spaces in order to hopefully get people less addicted and more offline. But I acknowledge the tension. It is a tension that I wrestle with for sure.
Well, and I guess in any era, if we go to Postman or even before, I think I'm a bit older than you, but I remember the film strip, not movie, the film strip controversy of bringing these little projectors with 35 millimeter tracks, and each image was a separate slide. And that was a controversy to bring that into the local church. Prior to that, it was a controversy when David Hubbard went on the radio at a Fuller Seminary. He was one of the pioneers, J. Vernon McGee, the Prince of the Power of the Air. That was radio, right? And so we look back with some, musing, but at the same time, you mentioned it earlier in relationship to your other book, community is such an overused term and underexperienced reality for the Christian. That you got a band of brothers, that you got people that know your secrets, you got people you're, walking through life with, and you have the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you're still brothers and sisters in Christ. You're still fighting for each other. It seems so simple, Brett, but this thing is so seductive. I don't understand half of what I do on social media, and I often, my oldest daughter works with me in inContext, and I often say, if it weren't for inContext in these interviews, I would be off all this stuff, because even this morning, I limit myself to a little bit of news when I'm getting up, and if I don't watch, back to you, what did I just do in the last hour? And I've got my news sources, that I like to scan, and I was reading one guy's post on X. He's a brother in Christ. He went on forever disabusing another brother. And I'm like, why am I reading this? One, what's his objective in doing this? Two, what does this do to the greater cause for Christ? Three, then I'm mad at everybody.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
before I get going,
our anger is one of the side effects of the scrolling age. All of us tend to be stressed and kind of disgruntled and angrier more often because we see these insipid debates play out on social media, or we catch a headline of some, crazy, horrible disaster that happened on the other side of the world that most humans in history would never have been aware of.
And never know about,
and never know about. And so, I mean, I think to go back to kind of the nuanced conversation, both things can be true. Like, you went through kind of the history of J. Vernon McGee using radio and Billy Graham using television. He was an early adopter of that with his crusades. I think it can be true that God uses every new technology in a way that redeems it and is used to expand his kingdom. It can also be true that those same technologies in everyday life for Christian formation need to be approached with great care and discernment. And I believe that God can use any technology in a redemptive way, even something like TikTok, which I would put in the category of like digital crack. Like it is like the worst of the worst. It is like, I mean, there's countries that are banning TikTok, even the US.
For good
we
reason.
Briefly banned
For good
it.
reason, yeah.
For good reason, yeah. But even TikTok, I mean, there are apologists, Christians who are doing good work on TikTok. And so I think what's important for everyday Christians who are listening to this, or pastors, church leaders, is just to think about your own context and your own calling. Like, where can technology be helpful, and where should you be cautious? And especially for church life, I think the key question I would pose is, if technology that you're adopting or in some way using in your church is changing the nature of church itself in some way, that's problematic, and that's something you should avoid. Technology should never be corrosive or compromising of the nature of church itself as an embodied gathering of people. So like live stream churches, I think we need to raise serious questions about, excessive use of encouraging people to use their smartphones in church in some way. I think we need to be careful about that. But there's other ways that I think you can use technology in your church in a way that enhances the embodied experience of church, whether that's having a nice looking website where visitors can take a look and feel kind of invited in and to learn about the church. I think social media accounts for churches are perfectly valid. If your main purpose is to kind of bring people in and remind them of events that they, embodied events and things that you want them to come to. So I just think that question is key. Like, is the use of technology in our church enhancing what God created the church to be, or is it compromising it in some way?
Well, and evaluating that, to use your word nuance, it's a nuanced discussion. At every church I've been involved with, the AV folks, and God love them. I mean, I love a great quality audio visual. We're doing it right now. But when that overstrips the content of, are we clear on exposition? Are we teaching the gospel? Are we explaining what it means to live faithfully? Generosity, whatever, character trait of God. And I have a church I would make an observation of. They got great wrappings, but there's no content in the box. And it's just always push and pull for professional quality. What's good enough? Do we need the bleeding edge technology? You brought up church a couple of times, and pastors and preachers, and having been a pastor for most of my years, there's always this comparison to, the next big guy. I mean, I can compare myself to Gospel Coalition contributors, or, a pastor of the past that I looked up to, or this guy's got the biggest ministry today. And now we're back to covetousness and doing what they do for perhaps not the right reason at the time, just because another ministry has X product. Oh, we have to do that too. I mean, we saw this with live streaming, right? When the pandemic hit, live streaming made sense because there were places where you could not legally gather. And we used to have shut-in ministries before all that. But the average pastor, if you're thinking about him, Brett, what counsel do you give him in just some general guardrails? How do we address, because if he's not adroit with some technology, he's arcane.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think I would start with that question I posed about, like, is our use of technology enhancing kind of the core values of our church, or is it compromising it? And you used the metaphor of like the wrapping versus what's inside the box. And I think that gets at what Neil Postman was talking about, and Marshall McLuhan before Postman. McLuhan influenced Postman's thinking quite a bit. The whole idea of the medium is the message. So you can't ever fully divorce the packaging and the thing inside the box. Like the technology, if we think of technology as the packaging of the message, it is always going to alter the message in some way, right? So if you take like a sermon by a pastor that's in person and a sermon by a pastor that is experienced on YouTube, even though it's the same quote unquote content, same words, it's a different experience, right? The medium has changed the message. And so I would challenge pastors, church leaders to think about how is this medium of technology changing our core identity and our message. But then practically, I would advise it's good to have a staff maybe of different generations. So, young people who can keep you in the loop of how are young people today engaging with technology? A Gen Z person these days, honestly, might tell you, actually, we don't want the church to be heavily technological because we're the generation that has grown up inundated with social media and digital life. And we don't want the church to encourage us to be on our smartphones. We want to break from that at church. So, but it's important to listen to those different generations' perspectives and, Mm-hmm.
We've seen the trend of Bible purchasing increase with this younger generation.
That Bible sales, physical Bible sales are up. Mm-hmm.
And I love the idea of my friend Darren Tyler and I did an interview on this just recently on some of these publications, and how the interaction with neuroplasticity with a pen and a pad and taking notes in your Bible exponentially more retention than on a phone or a device, where obviously the amount of information and the rapidity is you can't get close to.
It is.
But that neuroplasticity of writing a note and coloring, a highlight, whatever you do in your Bible, it's extraordinary. And when you go back to it as well, a physical text versus something online, it's a brave new world. Listen, I do want to have you back, and we have to continue this conversation. It's a remarkable book. I hope it does very well in provoking people to think about their disciplines. If you work out an hour a day, you should probably be off your phone X amount of time a day, or set a limit. Again, my older daughter, she has a rule, doesn't look at technology until a certain time in the morning. And, there are helpful things we can do, still getting the benefit, but being good stewards of how we, economize that usage.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just challenge, just to kind of end, I would challenge each listener to think about what is a small tweak you could make, given everything we talked about, given the many pitfalls of the scrolling life. I love the idea of don't look at your phone or any technology for the first half hour of each day. That's something I have tried to do. And it's made a really big difference in my spiritual health, because there's something about just starting off your day on the terms of your smartphone, where it's the first thing you look at when you wake up. It just sets you on a bad course. But there's something on the flip side, there's something so healthy to starting my day with a quiet spirit, where I can actually make space to pray and read my Bible and things like that. So just think about how listeners think about what you can do in your life today to just make a tweak for the better.
Yeah, when I get to my office in the morning, I shave, shower, get my coffee, go to have my time in the Word and prayer. If I turn technology on, all bets are off. Even
You're
if I use my Bible
hole.
software, you get my book, get my prayer books, get my journal, sit, drink coffee. It's amazing.
That's great. Yes.
Brett McCracken is the general editor of the new book and contributor, Scrolling Ourselves to Death. We'll have information, as always, in the show notes. If you didn't catch the title, you can purchase it anywhere you buy a book online. Brett, please do come back. We want to schedule that right away to get you back and have a part 2. We barely touched even the first couple of chapters, and there's a lot of helpful and convicting and depressing information.
Depressing with hope. I hope.
Another cheery sermon. All right. Thanks, brother. God bless. We'll see you soon, I hope.